Are you ready to unlock your full potential and maximize your productivity? Look no further than Productivity Smarts, the ultimate audio podcast hosted by renowned productivity expert Gerald J. Leonard. In every episode, Gerald shares captivating stories, invaluable tips, and cutting-edge strategies that will transform the way you approach productivity. Whether you're looking to reduce stress, overcome overwhelm, or simply get more done in less time, Productivity Smarts has got you covered. But that's not all. You'll also gain inspiration from real-life success stories of individuals who have achieved greatness through productivity. Plus, you'll learn the latest tools, techniques, and habits that will help you achieve a new level of happiness and fulfillment in your personal and professional life. So why wait? Join us every week as we delve into the exciting world of productivity and help you unleash your full potential. Get ready to take your productivity to the next level with Productivity Smarts. As a productivity expert and host of the Productivity Smarts podcast, Gerald J. Leonard has been a proud supporter of Kiva since 2011. Kiva is a non-profit organization that helps entrepreneurs in third world countries access the capital they need to start or grow their businesses. By making a small loan through Kiva, you can help these entrepreneurs achieve their dreams, support their families, and contribute to their local economies. And with a repayment rate of over 96%, your loan can be re-lent to another entrepreneur once it's repaid, creating a ripple effect of positive change. So if you're looking for a meaningful way to make a difference in the world, consider making a loan through Kiva. With loans as small as $25, anyone can be a micro-lender and help change lives. Visit kiva.org to learn more and start lending today.
Well, today my guest is Cindy Baker. She is a productivity coach, speaker, and an ADHD strategist. She's the author of Focus to Fortune, Profitable Time Management for Busy Minds. Cindy helps entrepreneurs half their time. In other words, cut their time in half on high-impact tasks by eliminating distractions and leveraging their ADHD strengths for greater productivity, profits, balance, and purpose. Cindy, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Excellent, excellent. I'm so happy to have you on the Productivity Smarts podcast. So, Cindy, I always ask my guests this because I'm a classical and jazz bass player myself, and I'm always interested in knowing, what types of music everyone loves. So what is your favorite style of music?
Well, I'm from Memphis, so we're the home of the blues and all of that kind of stuff. But I would have to say currently I'm into gospel and contemporary Christian music because I sing in the choir at my church, and it's a big music church. So
okay.
Hope Church, Memphis.
Gotcha. What type of music or what song is really important to you, or either what artist really resonates with you?
Well, when I want to get in a good mood, I want to get all energized, I like to listen to Aretha Franklin.
Oh, wow. Yeah, she's
I love the Motown.
For you. Yeah, she will do that for you. Well, listen, how did you become so successful in your career and in writing this book? And especially, obviously you're claiming and sharing and openly being authentic here, saying, hey, I've struggled with ADHD. And I know there's a lot of people out there that struggle with ADHD, but you were able to see how you could leverage that as a strength. And what I love about your book is you actually go in and talk about different business icons that have been diagnosed with ADHD, and they figured out how their brain works, so they then began to work the way their brains work and became really, really successful.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. I actually have a background as an educator. I'm a hired teacher and school counselor. And so I knew a lot about ADHD when it comes to adolescents. And I started to think, I really resonate with these symptoms, and I think I have this, So as an adult, I got my diagnosis. And so when I was growing up, no one really talked about ADHD. And when they did, it really wasn't in reference to girls. It was always just hyper boys,
Right.
You put them on Ritalin and stick them in a corner.
Exactly.
And so once I had the diagnosis, I became really curious about how it manifests in adults. And I just kind of went on this self-discovery journey. I read books and took workshops and learned everything that I could about adult ADHD, and I tried different strategies. Some things worked, some didn't. And I kind of put together a framework of habits and routines and strategies that made me really successful. And so it was more of a trial and error,
Right.
which is one of the things that I use as a selling point when I'm talking about my coaching program, is to say, hey, don't go the slow way like I did. I've already done all the work. I've figured out what works with an ADHD brain and what doesn't. And I think that's the key. Instead of focusing on what needs fixing,
Right.
weaknesses, what are the strengths and how could you leverage those?
Right.
Because yes, we have to manage the challenges that come with ADHD. But if that's all you're focusing on, you're going to miss out on some real benefits.
Exactly. And as you know, it's kind of like what they tell race car drivers: don't focus on the wall because you're going to drive into it, right? And so if you focus on your weaknesses or the challenges that you're facing all the time, then you start manifesting and bringing those things into your life. But if you figure out what are your strengths, even if you're having a bad day, right? If I've had a bad day, I will start my day off with writing out 5 things I'm grateful for. But if I feel like I'm just in a really weird mood, I will spend more time on that particular activity. And I might write out 10 or 15 or 20 things until I go, wait a minute, I'm really blessed. I don't know what's going on, but let's get out of this and move on. And so there's so many different techniques and strategies we can use to just kind of move forward in life, even when we hit and challenge. Now, in your book, Focus to Fortune, you guide entrepreneurs in assessing their time landscape. You do like a time audit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Could you walk us through that process and explain how that can help kickstart someone's productivity or improve their performance?
Yeah, awareness is the first step. And so if you don't understand where your time is going and how you're wasting time, then you can't fix it.
Right.
So one of the things that's interesting about people with ADHD is they have what they call time blindness. So they really think that things that they don't really want to do aren't going to take very long, because in the back of their mind, they don't really want it to take very long. And so they don't allow enough time.
We can all relate to that one.
Yeah. And so it's almost like they live in 2 time periods, now and not now, nothing in between. So if you're working in a 9 to 5 and your boss says, this is due in 2 weeks, then your brain says, oh, 2 weeks, I don't have to think about it now. And you completely forget about it until the night before, and then you panic and kick it into high gear. And, a lot of people say, oh, well, I work better under pressure, but you really don't.
Right.
And so, figuring out how you spend your time and then also how long things take. You can even kind of keep a log and write down things that you normally do, like how long does it take you to get ready in the morning, your commute to work, or things like that. And then estimate how long you think it's going to take.
Right.
But then when you do it, actually write down the start time and the actual end time. And then just look at that and see if there are any patterns. Do I routinely underestimate how long something's going to take? That's why, maybe that's why you're rushed all the time and late, right, and things like that. So it's very helpful as a starting point, I think.
Yeah. I thought that was a really good exercise to do a time audit and give yourself a week or so to kind of capture. And one, you got to remember to do it. So you got to kind of set yourself up so that you can have a notebook or somewhere that you can put it somewhere that as you're doing things, you can keep track of that and keep that top of mind. And that's where I guess a good coach comes in, because, many times someone who has ADHD will start off with, hey, I'm going to do this thing. Right. And then they go and they go get the notebook, and then they see a book that they used to read and they loved. And next thing they put the notepad down and they grab a book and they start flipping through the book. And then they see something in the book that reminds them of, oh, I got to go talk to Susie, or I got to give Jim a call. And next thing they give Jim a call, and they go back to the room and go, what was I here for?
Exactly. Time just slips away when we're distracted.
Exactly. So you want to definitely have a plan and keep a list in front of you. Now, with distractions, they're not going away. In fact, they're becoming more and more, especially with our phones and just, television, more channels than you can ever imagine, and just all the different things out there that are creating distractions. How do you recommend managing them in a way that protects focus without adding stress?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that I teach is the 90-minute sprint method.
Mm-hmm.
And it's similar to the Pomodoro method of productivity.
Right.
And it's where you would take one of your high impact tasks. So, and I usually suggest having no more than 3 main priorities each day. Now, you can have more on your to-do list, but
Right.
your top 3, these are going to move the needle in my business or my personal life. And you take one of those high impact tasks and you give it 100% of your attention for 90 minutes. Now, you can start with 30 minutes, or you could do 3 30-minute segments with a little tiny break in between.
Right.
But you get rid of every distraction that you can. So I even tell my clients, go put your phone in the other room, because even if you turn it off, if it's sitting next to you and you start to get to a difficult part of what you're doing, your brain is going to say, oh, this is hard. There's my phone. I could just turn it on.
Exactly.
And so if it's in the other room, it's too much trouble. So you make it as difficult as possible to engage in the distractions. So you put noise canceling headphones on, you shut the door, close all the tabs that you have open, everything that you can control as best as you can. Set boundaries with, especially if you're working from home, a lot of entrepreneurs work from home, set boundaries with those in your house. And then you just focus 100% of your attention on that one thing until a timer goes off, and you set a timer. And then you give yourself a little reward with a break, just a small break. If you think you're going to forget where you left off, just put a little sticky note,
Right.
start here. And then if you think you're going to lose track of time during your break, set a timer for the break, 5 minutes,
Right.
But you physically stand up and get the blood going, walk around, go to the restroom, get a drink of water, whatever. It kind of resets your brain.
Yes.
In fact, when I was an educator, we had a lot of training on brain-based learning. And one of the things that people with ADHD like to do is they get engrossed in something and they don't want to stop. They think, well, I've got momentum. I just want to power through. But studies have shown that you're not as productive if you don't schedule in those little mini breaks.
Right. Right.
So that's one thing. And then, of course, you have to figure out why you're getting distracted. Is a lot of times getting started is the hardest part. So we think, well, I'm just going to check my phone for a few minutes, but then I'll get started. And before you know it, you're researching the history of bubble wrap or something stupid like that.
You mentioned bubble wrap in your books.
Yes.
So there must be something in bubble wrap that you are interested in.
Most of my stories have a personal connection
to bubble wrap. That's interesting.
But, it is so easy to lose track of time when you're on your phone, because especially social media, it's designed, the algorithm is designed to steal your attention on purpose,
Exactly. Well,
and it's hard to find it.
Scrolling through, it's the algorithms and AI components are designed to get your brain to give you little bitty squirts of dopamine, right? Which is the feel-good drug of, I'm enjoying that's really cool. Oh, that's really cool. And you've done that, and you turn around, an hour or two have gone by, and you've wasted so much time where you could have used that time to do, as you say, that 90-minute sprint, which really gets into the area of what's called deep work, right?
Yes.
And it's really how you make progress in a lot of things. It's not, if I work 30 minutes on this task and I go in 30 minutes on this one and I go 30 minutes on that one, it's no, if you got to edit a paper or you're editing a book, you set aside 3 or 4 deep work sessions, and you just put your head down and you go and you plow through it, only focus on that one thing. And then it's like, wow, I got that done. I can give it to the editor now. I can pass it on, or I finished that presentation, or I've gotten that report done, or whatever it is that you're working on. And so that really resonates, but it does require discipline, because you have to turn off your phone. You have to cut off your email. You have to close down the browsers, anything that's going to, ding and grab your attention, so it does require some building up. So maybe if someone's struggling, they don't start off with 90 minutes. Maybe they do 15 minutes and then they go to 30 minutes. And you know what I mean? It's like building a muscle, right? Where they have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah. And you have to match your energy level to the task. So you don't want to waste your most mentally alert time of the day on something like admin tasks or running errands or something that doesn't take a lot of brain work. But you want to do what you said, that deep work at the time when you're physically awake, mentally alert, emotionally up. That's your peak time. It doesn't last all day. So you have to take advantage of it. Otherwise, I've used the example before. It's like trying to pull up weeds with a bulldozer in your garden. You're not matching the task to the energy level. It's overkill.
Exactly.
So for instance, for me, the morning is when I'm more mentally alert, but not first thing in the morning. First thing, I like to drink the coffee and walk the dog and all that stuff. And then I'm ready to settle down and I'm really alert mentally. In the afternoon, I start to get a little more sleepy and just not as mentally alert. So, when I wrote this book, I would do it in the morning time.
Right.
Because that was when I was more alert. So you have to kind of think that through.
Yeah. I like that part in your book. You talk about the circadian rhythms of the body and the brain, right? Because just like the high tide and low tide, our bodies have a rhythm that they go through, and our energy levels have a rhythm that they go through. And so we can also, in that time audit in the beginning that we talked about, and you can also kind of just be aware of when do you feel like you have the most energy, and it's going to be consistent throughout your week. It's going to be consistent throughout your month. So when you start learning those patterns, like I'm pretty energetic within the first 4 to 5 hours, I'd say 3 or 4 hours of the day. Right? That's where I can probably do a lot of my deep work, but I also have a routine that gets me set up for the day. Writing out my goals, meditation, and then exercise or yoga and so on. And then I get into my main task after a couple of meetings or something. And so you kind of have to, everyone's different. So you have to learn that for yourself. And so that leads me to another question around prioritization. Mastering prioritization, it seems to be really core to productivity. How can people align their priorities with profit-driven actions, especially under this ADHD brain wiring that we are talking about?
Yeah, people with ADHD, sometimes they want to live off this giant to-do list and everything looks equally important. But that isn't the case. And especially if you're an entrepreneur like me, 80% or more of your activities needs to be revenue producing in some way, or at least lead to that. And so if you're spending 2 hours on Canva trying to find the perfect font and color for a social media post, that is not a good use of your time. You know what I mean? And so one of the things that I mentioned in the book, and I also teach my coaching clients, is the Eisenhower Matrix.
Yes.
And you can use different variations of it. But basically, first I teach just brain dump, get everything out of your head, write it down, no organization to it. Then go back through and you want to identify using 2 categories, urgency and importance.
Right.
So the things that are urgent, that have a short deadline, and that are important, meaning they're high impact, that when you do this task, it's going to have a big result that's going to make a big difference. I don't mean just in business, but even in your personal life, and you want to prioritize those things. And then things that are important, but they have a further out deadline, you want to schedule those. You need a planner. If you're not using a planner, people say, well, what's the best planner? I sell one on Amazon, but I don't tell people mine's the best. The best one is the one you'll use. Right. Whether it's digital, paper, bells and whistles, or plain, whatever one you're going to look at every day, you schedule those things out. And then things that are urgent, but not as important, those are things that possibly you could offload. Maybe you delegate them, or Maybe you automate them somehow, and then things that are not important and not urgent, maybe just need to go off the list altogether, or put them in a file that you look at once a month for things to look at later,
Right.
And
Which also means you got to have a routine around what's urgent and what's important. But
yes.
yeah, Stephen Covey teaches that because he used the Eisenhower Matrix in the 7 Habits when he did
Mm-hmm.
the quadrant. And that's a really important tool. And, I'll share just really quickly, when I started this podcast, it was because I'd had a major bout with vertigo. And I had to relearn how to walk and use music to help me do that. I was able to do my TEDx talk. But then I realized as I was going through what's called vestibular therapy, I could not do more than 1 to 2 or 3 things a day. If I was lucky, I could do 2.
Yeah.
Really lucky, I got 3 things done. Most days I got 1 major thing done. And that prioritization activity that you're talking about was the game changer for me because I had to really focus on what was most important.
Yeah.
Right? What was most important? And the thing that was most important had to be something that was going to move the needle in my business in a major way. And so I really agree with you on that's super, super important. Now, let me ask you this as well. You also talk about saying no without guilt. Right? Because especially someone who's maybe struggled or has been diagnosed with ADHD, they want to be involved with a lot of different things. They want to please or be engaged with a lot of people. And they find themselves saying yes a lot of times to things that they probably should not say yes to. But to get to the point where you can say no clearly, what mindset shift or tactics should someone use to set those boundaries that'll free up their time, but allow them to say no with no guilt?
You're really talking about being overcommitted in your schedule, which is very common for ADHD people. It's common for a lot of people.
Right.
ADHD people sometimes have learned to jump through hoops to please people as a way to compensate for their ADHD symptoms. So they make a mistake and they feel bad about it. And so they go overboard trying to please the person. So people pleasing is a big reason. Sometimes people with ADHD are just impulsive.
Yes.
So they just knee-jerk compulsively say yes, or that sounds fun, or oh, I can do that, and they don't think through how many things are already on their plate.
Right.
And then sometimes it's just FOMO, the fear of missing out. We love novelty and things sound interesting to us. We have lots of different interests, so we just want to do everything. But you don't necessarily have to stop saying yes, but you do need to learn to qualify your yes.
Right.
So I teach just little phrases like, yes, I would love to, but I've got to check my schedule first.
Yes.
Or yes, I would love to, but I'll have to wait till next year because this year I'm all booked. In other words, you just always say, I got to have some time to think about it. Never just knee-jerk say yes. Always create that habit of saying some little phrase that feels comfortable to you to buy yourself some time. A lot of times when you step back, you go, I don't really want to do that, And a lot of times we're trying to please people we don't even like, because we're committing time that we don't have. And
Right.
I tell people every time you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else.
Exactly.
And a lot of times it's yourself.
Right.
And, the best thing you can give other people is a healthy you. So there's nothing wrong with taking care of yourself, because if you don't, you're not going to be any good to anyone.
Exactly.
There's a whole lot more I could say about that because it's a whole.
No, that's super, super important. That's super important. And that kind of leads me to my next question and kind of begin to wrap this up here. We're having a great conversation. And again, everything that you have in your book resonated with me because that's part of my journey of the Productivity Smarts podcast and recovery and so on. But one of the things that I found to be really powerful and that you talk about a lot in the book, and you give great examples, you gave good strategies, and that is habit formation, right? Focusing on developing the right habits, developing routines, and making them stick. So what are some of the go-to strategies for building lasting routines that stick?
And that's important because when you have a routine, you don't have to think about it.
Right.
And there is such a thing as decision fatigue. All day long, you're having to decide on the small things. You don't have a lot of bandwidth left for the big things.
Right.
So it is important. I mean, for instance, I don't have to think about, am I going to brush my teeth today? I mean, at least I shouldn't. I mean, it's a habit, it's just something that is just something I do.
Right.
So one thing that I teach people is to pair a new habit with an old habit.
Yeah, habit stacking.
Habit stacking, exactly. And that's really helpful. So like, for instance, I used to lose my keys all the time. And so then I started to put my keys in a coffee mug that I keep by the coffee maker. And I always have coffee. I don't have to think about that. The night before, I have one of those little things that grinds the beans, and it's got a timer on it. So it's just a habit that the night before, I always clean out the coffee maker, make the coffee for the next day. And so now I have this new habit of always putting my keys in that cup. And when I leave in the morning, I always know where the keys are, and that's just a silly example, but you could use it with bigger things too. And I read about a lady, she didn't want to exercise, but she wanted to develop a habit of riding her exercise bike, but she did like to read. So she sort of made a little bargain with herself. And she said that when I ride my bike, that's when I can listen to audiobooks, but that's the only time I can listen to them. Now, of course, she could have cheated because she made up the rules, but you tend to not do that. When you make a little bargain with yourself, it's like playing a trick on your brain.
Right.
And so that was a way she paired some new, less desirable habit with something that she enjoys doing.
Yeah.
So that's another little trick.
And then pretty soon you find yourself enjoying both of them, right? Because she gets into the habit of riding a bike every time she listens, and it's like, I can't listen to a book without wanting to ride my bike now. And but it requires, doing it over time, being intentional about it, being really focused on that. So I think if a listener just takes what we just talked about, where we talk about doing an assessment, we talked about distractions. We talked about prioritization, saying not feeling guilty to say no, and building lasting habits. Just those 5 things alone will radically change your life if you take them serious and you put them into practice, right? It's like you said, it's with the organizer. It's like, which one is the best? It's the one that you will use. I actually use both. I use a physical, handwritten organizer, and I use a digital organizer. So I use both. I'm in both worlds, but my system works for me. It may not work for someone else, but I found something that I like and that works for me that I will tend to use over and over again because now I've formed it into a habit. Cindy, if someone wants to learn more about you, hire you as a coach, get your book, get some of your free downloads, where can they go?
I mentioned before we started recording, I've got a free gift for your listeners. It's a course on how to beat procrastination, because I hear that that's a common struggle. And that can be at waitnomore.net. When you get on my mailing list, you will get every Sunday some free tips and strategies. You'll also hear about things coming up. I have a free masterclass that I do quite often. I have workshops and different things like that. If they want to just look at my website, it's cindybakercoaching.com. And I will just say one more thing just to kind of wrap up. I have all these little mantras that I say in my coaching program. And one of them is progress over perfection.
Yes.
If your listeners want to take one of those 5 things and start trying to implement them, they are going to mess up sometimes. And that's okay. But as long as you are continuing to start over each time, it gets a little bit easier each time. And so progress over perfection.
Excellent. Well, Cindy Baker, thank you so much for being a guest on the Productivity Smarts podcast and for sharing your book, your wisdom, and your insights. I know it's going to help a lot of people, and I know that my team's going to do a great job of providing your information out there so that people can take advantage of it. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
If you're enjoying the content and finding it valuable, we would appreciate it if you could take a moment and leave us a review. Your feedback is important to us and helps us reach a wider audience. If you leave us a 5-star review, it would mean the world to us. Not only does it help us improve the podcast, but it also helps us attract more sponsors and grow our community. Thank you again for your support and for listening to the Productivity Smarts podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to Productivity Smarts, where we help you achieve your goals and live your best life. We hope you've gained valuable insights and actionable strategies to boost your productivity and increase your happiness and fulfillment. Remember to apply what you've learned and keep striving towards your goals. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our podcast for more inspiring episodes and expert advice from our host, Gerald J. Leonard. Until next time, keep pushing forward and unleashing your productivity smarts.